and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start momentarily. First, a few announcements. Please note that we'll not open attendees' audio lines during today's Q&A portion. However, we do very much welcome your questions and comments, which you may submit anytime by typing them into the small window labeled questions on the right side of the webinar application. Also, a reminder that our session today will be recorded and will be made available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also find copies of today's slides available for download there. Today's session is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations and sales management professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you are joining us for the first time, we invite you to consider membership in the Sales Management Association and to visit us online at salesmanagement.org. Also, please save the date later this year for our 2018 conference, which will take place October 15th through the 17th at the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton. Look for more details about our conference on our special conference site at salesmanagementconference.com. My name is Bob Kelly. I am pleased to help present some very interesting research findings today, and I'm joined by Mike Esterday, Chief Executive Officer from Integrity Solutions. I'd like to introduce him briefly now, and I'll welcome him momentarily. Mike Esterday is Partner and Chief Executive Officer at Integrity Solutions, a performance improvement organization that focuses on developing sales and service teams. Mike's 35 years experience include a variety of sales management, sales, and training roles. He's been Integrity Solutions CEO since 2011. Mike, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bob. Looking forward to sharing some exciting results and doing this with you.
Yeah, likewise. Just a quick overview about what to expect on today's session. If you've attended these research readout sessions, you'll find this one quite similar. In it, I will try to provide some summarized findings from our recently concluded research. This research session is on sales coaching practices. I'll do that in a fairly unvarnished way, and I'll invite my co-speaker, Mike Esterday, to provide some commentary along the way. Mike's firm, Integrity Solutions, was kind enough to help us underwrite the research, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. So we're very pleased to have their CEO with us as well as their support. Now, when I'm done with that, then I'll have Mike deliver a few more focused remarks at the end, and then we'll save time for Q&A from our audience. So let's get to some of the research findings. I'll start with just a bit of background about the research itself. This is not the first time we've investigated the topic of coaching, which remains a central topic of relevance to our audience. In our study, most recently concluded that we'll talk about today, we wanted to know some basic information about coaching practice. Who, for example, in sales organization is coached and when, on what sorts of topics, and most importantly, we wanted to know which of these practices seem to be the ones that make the most difference. Can we correlate coaching practices with improved sales performance? So that was our objective with the study. We had in total 193 firms participate in the study. And the individuals from those firms who took our research questionnaire were predominantly sales managers. 49% were in that role in their organizations, either as frontline sales managers, in the case of 20% of our sample, or they were senior sales leaders, that is, leaders managing sales managers. That's true of 29%. We had sales operations make up 42% of the population. Our firms vary in size. Roughly half are under 100 million in sales. We had roughly a quarter over 1 billion in annual sales, and 8% over 10 billion in sales annually. So with that bit of context out of the way, I thought I'd start with a little more, or I suppose a fairly broad set of observations just about what we know from this research about coaching in general. And the first thing I would point out is that coaching is important. It has widely acknowledged importance in three very distinct constituencies or places in the organization. The first being the organization itself. 76% of our participating firms said that their organizations consider coaching important. 72% said their sales managers consider it important, and about 2/3, 65%, said that even their salespeople, the coachees, consider coaching important. That's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is that we learned that though acknowledged in importance, there's not an awful lot of coaching being done. We wanted to know just how much, and we found on average managers do 7 hours of coaching each week. So in terms of a percentage of their focus or emphasis, it's less than 20% of their time. There was, I'll comment a little bit more about these metrics in a moment, but it's important to know that there are some organizations that are doing a lot more coaching than others. The median number of hours managers spend per week coaching is 5, but the average is 7.2 hours. And the third thing I would point out is that coaching has no standard definition or set of consistent practices across firms or even within firms. We found that 63% of our participating firms agreed that they let their own managers decide which specific activities are quote unquote coaching in the sales organization. And only a quarter, just 26%, actually have a published definition, a formal published definition of what sales coaching is. So those are the things I'd point out if I were to give you a very quick state of the sales organization when it comes to sales coaching. Though it's important, it's not, there's not an awful lot of it being done. And in fact, coaching itself is uncertain activity and vaguely defined in many organizations. Mike, I'll invite you to comment.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. It's very, very interesting to me because if you think about what a manager should be doing, especially in sales, that's a key part of their job. They've got a lot of other hats they're wearing, but the primary thing should be developing their people to be more productive to sell more. And if this is their job, and yet you're having 75% of them roughly get to figure out what it is on their own, that's interesting. What if your salespeople were said to go out and sell a bunch? We're not going to tell you how. We're not going to give you any real guidelines. Not going to have any definition of it, but just sell a bunch. But on the other hand, as I think about what I've seen in the field, a whole lot of managers were successful salespeople. Therefore, they were promoted, but that doesn't always mean they're going to be a great manager. So what we probably have, as I've ridden with people, is you've got people that are, their definition of coaching is whatever they received when they were a salesperson. So however their manager did it, that's what they do. Or it's just kind of what comes natural. And too often it becomes that annual performance evaluation or the check, catch, and punish type of thing. So without a real definition across the organization, it's hard to build a coaching culture with this data that we're seeing. Very interesting.
Indeed, and I'll push us ahead. There's much more we can elaborate on the things you just brought up, Mike. So I thought it worth asking this question, which is, so what is coaching really important? And here are two quick ways of answering that question. The first is that we could correlate good performance with those companies that are better at coaching. We found, and I'll get more into this data later, in fact, we've correlated a lot of improvement in sales achievement across many different coaching activities, but this one simply looks at whether or not the organization coaches effectively in the sales force. And those that do show on the left set of columns a roughly 9% improvement in overall sales achievement rates. And we also looked at just the activity, divorced from any judgment of whether it's good activity, that is, whether it's effective or quality coaching. And we simply found that those organizations that have managers coaching on average 9 hours per week or more have a 7% performance advantages over those organizations that are not. So the punchline here is that coaching matters to results, seemingly, because organizations that are good at it have significantly better results, and organizations that simply do more of it, regardless of their effectiveness or quality in coaching, also have improved results. Furthermore, we are in fact doing not enough coaching. 3/4 of our population believe that they're doing too little coaching, and just 46% believe they are effective. So despite its acknowledged importance and its apparent impact on results, we still seem to be doing too little of it, and what coaching we're doing is not effective enough. So this is important. It has an impact of significant magnitude. It is difficult, and it seems to also be overlooked. And those are the things I would point out that add up to why coaching matters and why we should be paying attention to this topic in our sales organizations. Mike, your thoughts?
And Bob, I was thinking about the ineffective one on the right-hand side there. What we might be seeing, and some of those managers might actually be harming sales results instead of helping. Some of those salespeople may be better off not even having a manager.
Well, it does beg the question, where does management add value? I'd not want to get too enthusiastic about the notion of, maybe getting rid of sales management. It would guarantee my, that's an existential problem for me, actually, running the Sales Management Association. But I do think the question is a good one to ask. What good are we doing as sales managers? This data does bring to the forefront many of those questions, certainly as it relates to developing people. Okay, so the next set of comments I have from the research, and by the way, I'm very excited about this research. It's the best piece of research we've done on coaching and developing salespeople from management's perspective. I'm regretful we can't share a lot more of it here. We don't have time, but we will have a very comprehensive report out, and I'd encourage you to look for that. We're quite proud of the insights that we learned from this research, and we're eager to share them with you. But I'll press on with a few summary observations. These just in the category of, well, what are people doing when it comes to coaching? The first thing I'd point out is that our salespeople are most likely to get coaching when they join the organization and shortly before we kick them out of the organization. Those are very likely occasions that prompt coaching. I call this coaching from cradle to grave, but not so much in between, unless a salesperson happens to ask for coaching. And those three things combined, when a salesperson first joins us, when a salesperson has missed their performance expectations and is presumably at risk, and when a salesperson asks for help, those are the most common occurrences when coaching is delivered. That's followed by the fourth bar that you'll see on this chart, when a salesperson is engaged in something very important, a deal or an opportunity. Least likely as a scenario for coaching is when a salesperson is high performing. That's likely in only about a third of organizations. Importantly, and that topic will come up again in just a moment. We ask about which topics are considered important when it comes to coaching from our respondents. And we found that some of the sort of meat and potatoes topics are the very most important. Chiefly, making sure that a salesperson is aware of their performance, which is not to say that should be the sole topic of a coaching interaction, but it certainly it seems to be the most important to include. Secondly is strategizing specific opportunities or the portfolio of opportunities in the pipeline. Then comes enhancing knowledge of the offering, products and services that are provided. Only fourth, in the fourth position, do we see developing skills, and then below that, improving motivation. So those latter two things, skill development and improving motivation, I would suggest are really the blood and guts of coaching. Arguably, I would say some of those other things don't really even qualify as true coaching when it comes to developing capability in a salesperson. The key point is that among the things we're doing, there are a lot of important things. And if we look also at the effectiveness ratings, which I'm just going to overlay over the importance ratings, you can see that effectiveness does lag rated importance in many of these areas. But in fact, the things that we're least effective at as coaches are skill development and improving motivation. Now, there's one issue among the six here that is that stands alone. It and only it among the six is rated in the top half of importance and in the bottom half of effectiveness, and that is skill development. Again, the sort of essential core of coaching. So that I would call out as management's single most important priority for improving when you take all this data as a whole, followed shortly by motivation improvement. Mike, what are your thoughts about this? Mike, are you with us?
If I get my mute button off there, it's interesting
yes.
to say that developing skills and motivation are lower on that, and it's really a mindset of where our focus should be. It's almost like the squeaky wheel, one of the slides you had earlier. The folks that get the coaching are either new, or they're problem people, or there's an opportunity you're trying to solve, or you're walking into a particular call you may be coaching. But the overall just development of the person, development of their skills and their motivation is fairly low. What we find, though, is that if you will flip that and focus coaching more on developing the skills and the motivation, people will figure out how to solve a lot of their own problems. So coaching here, I think we're saying, is very reactive, Whereas if in a coaching culture, a true coaching culture should be proactive, where we're thinking, how can I build that person? How can I help them develop their skill instead of me doing it for them? So yeah, that's very interesting data there.
Indeed. Well, let's press on and talk about a perfectly reasonable question to ask here, which is why don't companies at minimum do more coaching? And here's at least two things I'd point out from our research as likely reasons. The first is that it's not considered part of the job. And put another way, our sales managers are too busy to coach. They're too busy doing the things that presumably are more likely to be considered part of their sales management job. So this is a fundamental issue that though we may say managers are supposed to help develop salespeople, it's not reflected in the activities that they're doing, especially since more than 2/3, 67% of our organizations say their sales managers are too busy to coach. Another sort of family of issues here is that managers are not held accountable for coaching. And we have a number of different questions that we use to get at this area of accountability. And so there are some very fundamental things that suggest that organizations, even if they do expect managers to be coaching, they are not doing some very basic things to reinforce that accountability. And very significantly is the third issue on this list, which is managers don't know how to coach. It's true in more than half of the organizations, and 55%. Our respondents said their managers don't really know how to coach. So some very fundamental kind of root cause issues related to this larger question, well, why aren't we doing more coaching? And the point seems to be that even within those, the minority of those organizations where managers know how to coach, they may not be asked to do so, and even among those that are, they're likely not held accountable for doing so. So a multifaceted set of problems here. It's also worth pointing out that coaching as a management activity is not so well supported in our organizations. Only half provide any kind of training at all related to improving coaching skills for managers. Significantly, fewer than half, just 44%, are organizations where the coaches themselves receive coaching from their own management. We have a very interesting correlation with results related to that topic. And then you can see the other things on the slide. I mean, the chief story here is that we're not investing the things that would suggest a programmatic approach to coaching, that the organization is investing in coaching as a program with consistent practice and with fairly routine tools that other programs would have. So I suppose this data is a bit sobering. I don't know what your thought is, Mike, but there seems to be a lot of challenge and obstacles to coaching well in organizations.
Yeah, there are. And at the same time, on the other side, I think there are great opportunities that organizations that look at this and say, wow, if I did have focus on coaching, what kind of increases could I have? I was listening to a TED Talk a while back called, if you want to be great at something, get a coach. And it's because it's not really how good we are now, it's how good we're going to be later that matters. And that's what we're talking about in developing people here. So it is, it's a critical thing that needs to be focused on.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that you, alluded to the upside and the silver lining here, which is that improvement goes a very long way toward stimulating results, as suggested by our research. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I'll just revisit a slide I put up earlier, which shows the difference in performance among firms that are effective generally in coaching salespeople and who do more of it than other firms. There's a performance advantage of 9% in firm sales objective achievement for the former, that is coaching effectively, and a 7% performance achievement differential simply for doing more coaching, in particular for doing more than 9 hours per manager per week. I also want to talk about some correlations we ran related to specific coaching occasions. So for those organizations that are likely to provide coaching in a situation where a salesperson requests it and where a salesperson is high performing, those two occasions correlated with the biggest differential in sales objective achievement. In the case of both of those, it's a 10% differential. Now, we also looked at the sales performance of those firms that were unlikely to do that. So if a firm is unlikely to respond to a salesperson who requests coaching help, their organization's sales results are 19% percentage points below other firms. So, which suggests jumping from that category of not responding to being a firm that doesn't respond to a firm that does respond alone represents a 29% average improvement in sales objective achievement for the organization as a whole. There are positive correlations that you can see in these other areas too, namely when a salesperson needs improvement in a specific skill or a specific behavior, or even when a salesperson has missed a performance expectation, or when they're engaged in a specific, high value deal, the perhaps more obvious kind of coaching opportunities. Each of them, being likely to respond to these things, it does equate to a performance differential. So it's interesting to look at the right side of this chart too. Initially, this was sort of unexpected, which is coaching a brand new salesperson, that is a salesperson new to the company, does not have a positive correlation with results. In fact, those companies that are unlikely to do it outperform those that are likely to do it. So just the opposite of what you might expect. We attribute this difference to the need for more training at this juncture in the salesperson's tenure with the company and less coaching. So this is not to say that you shouldn't invest in salespeople at this time when they're new to the organization, but coaching investment is better left to a salesperson once they've been through initial training, is our take on that piece of information. A few other slides here that showcase some of the correlations we made. Let's talk about the specific topics that are coached. We found that the highest correlation relates to the most obvious thing that should be present in a coaching discussion, which is, how well are you doing, and how does that align with what we expect you to do? Again, this doesn't suggest the sole focus of that topic. It simply suggests that it's likely to be present and management is effective in coaching to that topic. Next comes improving motivation, so followed by developing skills. So what we see here is, it's essential to provide that table stakes effectiveness of being able to communicate performance expectations and current performance. And then those organizations that are able to do those hardest things, you'll recall that improving motivation and developing skills were among the areas where managers are least effective coaching. But based on our correlation here, they seem also to have some of the highest impact on sales achievement results, with advantages of 9% and 6% for improving motivation and developing skills, respectively. Now, onto a piece of data I found maybe most interesting, which is the highest correlation we saw with sales performance related to some of the manager development issues is that the best thing you can seemingly do for your managers isn't actually to train them or even to support them with the right tools to coach. It's to actually coach them. So we found that in organizations where coaches are themselves coached, that those organizations had a 10% improvement in sales performance over other firms. The opposite is also true to an even greater degree, where firms say that their coaches are not coached themselves. They have a 13% sales achievement performance penalty. So I think this chart, especially the concept of coaching coaches, speaks to the importance of cultural, embedding coaching into the culture of the organization. Would you agree, Mike?
Absolutely, yes. Now, of course, those managers, senior leaders who are coaching those frontline managers, hopefully they have been trained properly, so they're doing a good job at it. When it's modeled and supported and actually practiced, people tend to do more of what's expected of them by their manager. So if they're being coached, they're being held accountable of it, they'll do more of it with their salespeople.
And yes, indeed. So, well, I'm going to conclude my comments here. And as mentioned before, I wanted to make sure that we allocated some time for you, Mike, to kind of provide your perspective. As a firm, Integrity Solutions really has a very well-developed and nuanced kind of approach to these topics. So I'll yield the floor to you for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll get to questions from our audience.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bob. As I look at data like this in any kind of a webinar, I can find it fascinating, but the question then is, so what? What does this mean to me? And one big thing that it seems to say is that if all we did was spend more time coaching, there would be higher productivity. Even if you didn't know how to do it better, nothing else in place, if we just did more of it, there'd be higher productivity. But what if we actually did more of it and we were more effective at it? So I thought I'd share with you just a couple of takeaways that hopefully you can go back and use in your organization. And the first one is to have a common definition of coaching. Clearly know what coaching means. I mean, what's the cost in your organization if we don't have that definition? If all the managers are doing it differently, some are doing poorly, some may be doing it okay, you're missing the leverage, you're missing the synergy that can happen from having a clear definition of what it is, what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. There's actually a misunderstanding at times between coaching and managing. Too often, managers are thinking about staffing, organizing territories, planning budgets, solving problems, looking at numbers, details, and that's what they think coaching is. Whereas coaching, we're really talking about the human side. It's the development of people. It's identifying potential in people. It's developing and coaching the whole person, asking questions, listening, figuring out what they want to have as far as reaching goals, helping them accomplish more. It's doing the softer things often versus the numbers and the details. It really bridges the gap between leadership. If we have to have management, we have to have coaching to be a good leader. And what's interesting is that if we could look at most people, this is probably where they spend more of their time as a manager. They're spending most of their time managing, going to meetings, doing details. That's where they're busy versus taking time to coach. So number one is to get a clear definition of what coaching is in your organization. The second thing, the thing we hear the most often is, I don't have time to coach. I'm too busy. But frankly, we think that can be also the number one excuse, that it's not just the fact that I'm busy, which we know managers are, but it's figuring out how do I focus enough time to do the little things that can make the big difference. Most people find time for doing what they feel is really important. And the truth is that if we spend a little bit of time coaching, we'll save a lot more time on the back end. I can't tell you how many managers have told me that when they install the coaching process and really taught their people how to solve their own problems, it's almost like the spigot of problems shut off, and their salespeople started solving more of their own problems and coaching themselves instead of being so reliant on the manager. We don't have to necessarily focus a lot of time on it. It's just a matter of building it into our conversations. Bob talked about the average manager spending 5 to 7 hours a week on coaching, and if they spent 9 or 10, there's a big bump in productivity. Well, that doesn't mean you've got to work 43 hours a week now instead of 40 or whatever you're doing. It's a matter of reshifting how we're spending our time. It's really about confidence. It's confidence that I really can coach. I think a lot of managers, they were successful, as we said, as salespeople, but now they don't really know how to do it. As the data says, about half of them have not even been trained on how to coach. They're not being coached by their manager. Therefore, they're not really confident doing it. What they may be confident doing is selling. So when they ride with someone, they become that super rep. They jump in and do the demonstration themselves. They close the deal. They ride in a high horse and they're the firefighter. They save the day. They're the person who deals with the exceptions. Instead of teaching their people how to do that and developing their skills and their motivation to do more of it. So number one is to have a clear definition. Number two is don't buy the no time excuse. As an organization, don't buy it, and yourself. Don't let yourself give you that excuse and buy into it. The third thing is to have a structured coaching process. A coaching process that's simple, because if it's too complicated, people won't do it. And then train everyone how to use that system. Senior leaders ought to be coaching the next level down. That level ought to be coaching the frontline managers. Managers then coaching their sales team. And not just down, but coaching up. We can apply the same principles coaching peer-to-peer. And a very simple system a lot of our clients use is on the screen there. And in the center, it's a simple 5-step process where you're simply asking questions about their goals, professionally, personally, not just looking for the answers, but what are the emotions behind the facts. Listening to people, really listening. Tone of voice, body language, not just the words. And believing that people have the answers within them, that I don't have to be the expert and tell them how to do everything, but to ask them and help them understand how to solve their own problems. A third step is to coach, to discover what are the constraints that are holding them back. Suggest not 15 actions, but one specific action they can do. Keep the responsibility on their shoulders. There's a great book by, it's called The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. And managers tend to be these firefighters that come in, as we said, and the person says, I've got a problem, the manager says, well, I can solve that, put that monkey on their back, and the next problem, before you know it, at the end of the day, they've got a bunch of monkeys on their back. Keep the responsibility on the salesperson's shoulders. The fourth step is to praise. Praise specific actions, specific things that they're doing, attitudes, abilities, be sincere, and finally challenge. Challenge them to do more, be more, reinforce your belief in them, and gain commitments that they'll actually do it. Now, we do those simple steps and bookend that with preparation for calls for our coaching and following up and holding people accountable. That simple system works. And what we've seen is so many people spend time. I've had managers say, you know, I applied this and I learned more about that salesperson in the 30 minutes or so we sat down to have a conversation about what really motivates him or her than I've learned in the last 8 years of working with them. So it doesn't have to be hard. It's a focus of time and some effort and some simple skills. It doesn't have to be a sit-down meeting, as we said. This coaching process can be something you do in coaching moments. So you're riding with someone, you're on the phone with someone, and you notice something you can praise or coach them on. Coupled with this, if organizations have the tools that will help the managers, that was one of the things in the study, that most people don't have the tools that are necessary, the planning, coaching tips, best practices. So if we'll take a system like this, and then thinking back of the data, not just coaching the problem folks, the folks who are just starting or about to quit, but also coaching the top performers, coaching up, down, and peers, senior leaders using this to coach the frontline managers, then we start to have a coaching culture. The fourth one is one that Bob talked about on coaching motivation. There we go. And a study that we did in conjunction with Bob and the team a year ago was around sales. And in that one, we found that 84% of sales leaders believe that achievement drive, passion, emotion, sense of purpose is equal or more important than skills. And that companies that focus on that enjoy a 20% higher productivity. But yet it's not just the skill set, it's how do you coach to the mindset. So if we think about what it takes to be successful in sales, if we think about a couple of conversations, one is they have to be good at conversations with the customer. Skill set. How do you plan for your calls? A sales process, communication, relating to different types of people, creating value for people, strategy. We've got to get good at that. And the manager need to be coaching to that. But if 84% of the folks say that the other side is more important or equally important, we've got to coach the mindset, coach to their goals. What kind of possibilities do we believe are out there for them? What are their limiting beliefs? How do we break loose of those? How do we have a sense of purpose? As Simon Sinek says, find their why, and how to keep them committed to the activities that are necessary for success. All those conversations, we need to be able to do both of those. And that conversation that people have with their manager is really critical for that. So if we think about all these pieces to kind of pull this together, if we could bring an alignment to these things, we'll see an increase in productivity. If we can shift on the left-hand side some of the view of coaching, if we have a clear definition that coaching is building people, it's coaching the whole person, it's not just numbers and details. And if we're trained on how to do that with a simple system, the second circle there, I believe I can do that. If managers are trained, their managers doing it with them, it's consistent, a simple system, say, I can do that. That is consistent with my values. It's how I want to treat people. On the far right, I really believe in my people. I see more in them than they see in themselves. Therefore, I'm going to have more activities. I'm going to be coaching more often. When we bring that into alignment, if you look at those arrows, the arrows stand for gaps or problems. And if I'm asked to coach people in a way that's not consistent with my values, I'm not going to do it. Or if I'm asked to coach and I really don't believe I can do it, that's not my abilities, I won't do it. But if we can get these into alignment, we'll have a higher percentage of times we'll actually do the coaching and it'll be more effective. Where we find people spend more time naturally is on activities. And that's okay, but if you're not getting the quantity or quality of activities that you need, it's probably like a check engine light. That one of these other things is really the problem. So as senior leaders coach their managers, they need to help them get a positive, noble view of what coaching is, that they can do it and build more belief in their people. So with that, Bob, those are just a few things that we want to talk about to kind of summarize. If you have a definition of coaching, have a simple system of how to coach and with the corresponding tools, make sure the managers coach, the senior leaders coach the managers, hold them accountable, that we coach not just the challenging situations, but we coach the top performers. We start to have a stronger coaching culture, and what the data has shown is higher results. Now, if you want to learn more, we have some time for questions. Yeah, go ahead, Bob. I was going to say, if you want to learn more about some of these things, please be in touch with us afterwards or through Bob. And there's a coaching ebook that goes into these details in much more depth. You're welcome to get that at no charge. There's also a recent blog we have on our website on how to coach your salespeople to have powerful conversations. And you're also welcome to come to one of our trainer-trainer certifications on coaching. We have these in our Scottsdale and Nashville office training centers, and this coming up next week, if you want to go to Scottsdale very quickly, or in July here in Nashville. So with that, Bob, let me turn it back over to you.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you for your insights, Mike. And I'd like to, at this point, just remind our audience that if you have some questions, we have a few minutes that we can allocate to responding to your questions. You want to just type them into that small window on the right side of your application labeled questions, and then they'll come to me and I'll read them, and we'll we'll do our best to get to all of the questions. So let's get to those straight away. Mike, the first question is, as a sales manager, how can I promote coaching in an environment unfriendly to coaching? That is, it's not part of our culture and it's not likely to be soon. Any thoughts here?
That's a good question. This would be really nice if I had that culture, but that's not what I'm living in day to day. Well, even though you're not living in it, I guess the question is, will improving my coaching skills help me be more successful and help me help my people be more successful? If that's true, and not just this data, but all kinds of other data shows that, the question is, how can I get better? So even if your managers are not coaching you, even if the training team is not training you, if you don't have a definition of coaching, go out and find one yourself. We'd be glad to send you some information here, but there are plenty of books on how to be effective coaches. And if all we took is that one system there, those 5 steps of how to ask questions, listen, coach, praise, and challenge, my guess is that you'd have impact on your team. I've had a lot of folks say, I can't control the whole company, I can't control the product, I can't control all these things, but what I can control is my attitude, my learning, and how that impacts my team.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think it's likely harder for that manager to find the time or to offload some of the things that they'd be required to do in order to coach. But I do think the advantages accrue just as they would to an organization. You know, if you're the manager of a team, the performance impact is likely to be there for you as well. So let's get to
I'll bet, Bob, that there are others within that company that feel the same way. So look for a couple of others that might have a similar view and put together a little study group and hold each other accountable and learn from each other and share best practices of what's working to become a better manager, better coach.
Good. Our next question is, this is great insight coming from mostly people within sales and sales operations. How do you feel the results would be the same or different if you solicited other functional group leaders such as accounting or IT or ops, etc.? I know you have experience training service organizations as well as sales. I mean, you must have an opinion here, Mike.
Yeah, some of our clients actually train every employee in the organization, whether it's on sales or coaching or service or other topics. And we actually find it's very similar across the organization. Most people know that coaching is important, but it's not very prevalent. So whether it's in HR or accounting or the call center or wherever it is, there's not a lot of coaching going on. But when it does happen, we see increases in productivity, whatever productivity is for that group, whether it's call efficiency in a call center or if it's more people taking advantage of services in HR or whatever it is, productivity and effectiveness goes up.
Yeah, I would almost certainly bet that other functions have this issue where managers aren't coached and coaching isn't practiced nearly as well as it should be or as much as it should be. In fact, I mean, manager education generally is sort of shabby in a lot of, no matter the function. I'd point out here that, you know, and as respectfully as possible, that the thing about sales that is different is that I think it's harder and it's more subjective in a lot of ways. What good outcomes, you know, what activities should be managed, and it also matters a lot more. I mean, not to disparage any other functions, but getting the sales function right can have a huge impact on the overall company's performance.
It really does, really does. And we're finding it's similar issues around the world. Maybe in Europe, that maybe managers spend a little bit less time with people in the field than in the U.S. or different slight things, but these are really people issues and organizational issues and process issues. So we see them all around the world in any kind of industry.
Yeah, good. Our next question is a point of clarification. There's someone who wants to know about the book you mentioned about monkeys. People love monkeys, I've found, but tell us about that book again, Mike.
Yeah, it's Ken Blanchard, one of his many books, and it's called 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. And it's one of my favorite books of his about delegation, really. And I like that book because I need to get better at delegating myself. And it's so easy for someone who's good at something, especially as a salesperson, to become a manager and say, well, I'm going to jump in and do it myself instead of teaching someone else to do it and coaching them.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what should organizations do first if they want to improve overall coaching effectiveness?
What should you do first? I'd say a couple of things. One is there needs to be a commitment for it, and it's not just senior leaders signing off on doing coaching, but it's a senior leadership commitment and involvement that they are going to create a coaching culture, and that starts with the senior leaders coaching the next level down, the next level, and so forth. And number two is clearly defining what is coaching, and number three is deciding on a process to put it in place. I mean, what is our system? How are we going to roll this out? And then holding people accountable. If it's just a program du jour that comes through and, wow, that was a great one-day coaching thing, or here's a great coaching video, that's not going to work. So it needs to be a cultural issue, a cultural focus. This could be a long-term one, and you're never going to totally master it with turnover of managers and people backsliding. But it needs to be. It's probably the biggest leverage point in an organization is to help those frontline managers better coach their people.
Yeah, well said. Let's see. On to some additional questions here. Based on the stats you showed early on related to the percentage of time spent coaching, what would you say should be the average for one person per month or per week? I've been looking at this data extensively. I'm not sure that I have a quick answer here. I would say if you're in the category of, as many companies are, at least a quarter where there's very little coaching being done, I would aim for, at least 4 hours per week per manager, with the caveat that is truly coaching and it's not, something else, namely beating salespeople up about their performance, that kind of thing. To your own comment, Mike, once you do have a definition of what real coaching is, I think that's the yardstick to use to measure time. But anyway, all those things being equal, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a sales manager to have between 25 and 50% of their emphasis and their effort focused on developing the team that they manage. And that's more gut feel, should be amount than anything related to data. How would you answer that question, Mike?
Yeah, what's interesting in this data, I think, Bob, is that since there's not a clear definition of coaching, my guess is that data is actually worse than what we're saying, that people are probably coaching less than what they're even reporting because they're probably mixing up management, details, reports and all that type of thing, performance appraisals with coaching. So as poor as some of these numbers look, it's probably even worse than that. And as far as the amount of time, part of that depends on how much coaching you need to give with each person. Some people may have 5 people they're managing, some may have 15. So that may vary also. But the more time you can spend, like you said, if you spend 25 to 50% of your time coaching, That's not all the job, but that's a big part of the job.
Yeah, good. At risk of going over, I'm going to try to add one more question here, and then we'll do our best to get to some of the other questions offline. But this is an interesting question. I'll have you respond, Mike. The questioner asks, can you discuss your understanding and insights on coaching a highly skilled but uncoachable team member versus coaching a lower skilled but highly coachable team member? From an executive point of view, we see more results in coaching the less skilled, but we are one firm, so I'm interested in your thoughts.
So if I follow that correctly, you've got a less skilled but coachable person. They're getting better results than a highly skilled but uncoachable. Well, I guess the data and just my gut instinct says we ought to be coaching both. This could be different situations, though. You'd love to have the one that's very coachable. You hope they actually have the potential, and the unskilled part's just the fact that they don't know what to do yet, and they do actually have the potential. You are going to see more growth with those kind of folks. With the uncoachable person, I guess the question is, why are they uncoachable? Is there something behind that uncoachableness that's a word that is causing that? Do they have an unrealistic view of their importance, of their skills? Is this more of a counseling conversation versus a coaching conversation? Is there something with our relationship that is not positive? Is there something I'm doing or not doing that hasn't built the kind of trust relationship with that person that allows them to be more coachable? So without knowing the situation, that's just some initial thoughts.
Yeah, that's a very provocative question. Perhaps one we can explore in some future research. At any rate, sadly, we're out of time. I just want to thank you personally again, Mike, for your great insight and your support of this very interesting research.
Well, thank you. It's been fun to look at this and to share these ideas. It is such an important topic, and we appreciate being involved.
Terrific. Well, before I sign off, I will remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association webcast is Tuesday, April 24th, when we'll host a session on the state of sales enablement in 2018. You can learn about this session and many other sessions on our website at salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks again for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.